I just have to show off my little UID from the early days of Drupal. I've been working in Drupal since 2003, mentored initially by Moshe, whose UID is something like 23.
What version was it back then?
4 point
Okay.
something.
Okay, wow.
Yeah, back then they moved forward a lot more quickly. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So my great claim to fame back in the 4.x days was the Path Auto module. And I imagine most people know that by now. If you're concerned with SEO, you want some nice paths for Google and other engines to absorb and key off of. More relevant today is that I'm the primary developer of the Migrate module and its friends and children, grandchildren, Migrate D2D and WordPress Migrate. How many people are familiar with Migrate under Drupal 7? Okay, so some hands not raised. So Migrate is a framework that helps you develop site migrations, helps you develop the processes by which you will import data from some other site, another Drupal site. It could be a WordPress site, a Jive site, anything else, into your current Drupal site. The Migrate module itself is the framework and the basic tools you use to do that. Migrate D2D builds on top of those tools to provide the ability to go from one Drupal site to another and customizing what you pull over and how you map it to your current site. And WordPress Migrate is for importing WordPress blogs into Drupal. And I'm new around here. A year ago, my wife and I moved here from the Boston area. Specifically Southern Illinois, where we're really enjoying exploring the Shawnee National Forest and the other sites down there. So, the basics. What's going on with this talk about Migrate in 8? Migrate's always been a contributed module. But as a lot of you may know, the upgrade path from Drupal 6 to Drupal 7 using the traditional update methods was fraught with difficulties. Traditionally, Drupal is always updated in place. That is, you update your code and then you run an update process that takes your existing database and within that database twists and turns everything around until it fits your new code. And by the time of Drupal 7, Drupal was big enough and complex enough that it became very difficult for that update process to work cleanly for all sites. So there are any number of problems, and the reason we still have a lot of Drupal 6 sites out there is because that process was so difficult. So the decision was made to leverage the concepts that were implemented in the Migrate module in Drupal 7. And instead of updating Drupal in place, we're going to do it by creating a new Drupal 8 site and then copying and transmogrifying the data as we move it from Drupal 6 or Drupal 7 into Drupal 8. The feeling is that we can have a more stable and also more customizable upgrade process. And also, this enables us to go directly from Drupal 6 to Drupal 8 without having to go through Drupal 7. Because in the old update process, you always had to go in order. You couldn't skip a version, you had to update through intermediate versions. So, built into Drupal 8 core itself will be a simple, direct, complete migration from Drupal 6 and Drupal 7. If you install core alone, you'll be able to press a button, fill in the details on where your old site is, where the database is, where the files are, and it will be copied as is into your current Drupal 8 site. And in contrib, we also plan on providing migration paths from Drupal 5 and also Drupal 8. In the Drupal 7 world, we've seen actually a lot of people who are doing things like consolidating multiple sites into one, or they want to do a major site refactor, which is very difficult to do with Drupal. You can't just very easily change content types in place, change their names, change their relationships. So there will also be the ability to move from one Drupal 8 site to another, do custom migrations across. And as for contrib modules, they've always done what core did in terms they would move from their Drupal 7 version of the contrib module to the Drupal 8, or the Drupal 6 to the Drupal 7 version by providing update hooks that would manipulate their database tables, whatever their content is in place. Now they will also be using the migration path. They will be leveraging these core services, migration services, instead of providing update hooks. So, episode 8 of Drupal, the new upgrade path. As I said, we're not doing it in place. We will migrate to a fresh Drupal 8 instance, and this is so redundant. I was reorganized the presentation a little while I was doing it, and maybe one of those slides could have been skipped. So one little bit of detail. So I'm not going to talk too much about the architecture, but I will say one of the key enhancements of Drupal 8 is the concept of configuration as a thing in itself. Previously, Drupal configuration has been variables stored in the database, or it's been hidden away in code. It's been kind of every module for itself, figuring out how it's going to manage configuration. The features module was an attempt to try to make this all easier to work with, and I always say the features module is the worst possible way to do configuration management in Drupal 7, except for all the others. So in Drupal 8, we've got configuration management built into core. Configuration is its own thing. Configuration is always stored in YAML files, which are very easy for humans to read and edit. And migration, which used to be implemented in code, and as of Migrate 2.6, there was some ability to customize that through the UI and save some of the field mappings and so forth, your configuration in the database. In Drupal 8, migrations are configuration entities. So the field mappings, the source definitions, the destination definitions that you used to put in your class constructor in Drupal 7, now that's a YAML file. There's still will be some need to write code in the form of plugins, but there will be a lot less code needed to implement migrations in Drupal 8. And for the contrib modules, instead of the traditional update hooks, there'll be YAML files to map their old data to the new data, and maybe there will be a plugin that provides a source query for querying the old data. That should be a bit simpler. The update hook concept isn't completely done. It's still going to be used for minor updates, going from version 8.1 to 8.2 of your contrib module. If you need to make any changes to your data, you're typically going to still use the update hook. So, core, we'll dive a little deeper on what exactly is going to be, or actually is in Drupal 8 core. And the central piece of this is the Migrate module. This is the general APIs for migration to Drupal 8. If you know the Drupal 7 Migrate module, this is basically the stuff that was in the includes directory, plus the destination plugins and the SQL source plugin, without any of the tools or additional source plugins. So built in is the ability to import from PDO SQL databases, and they're the destination plugins to write to all the core entities and any other core data and core and configuration. And that's one distinction, actually, I should point out, is that in the Drupal 7 Migrate world, we never got around really to migrating configuration. Migrate module doesn't have any destination plugins for variables or most kinds of configuration. Blocks are kind of funny. They're sort of half configuration, half content. But in Drupal 8, the Migrate framework supports writing, importing, configuration, and content, which obviously is necessary to completely upgrade your old Drupal 6 and Drupal 7 sites. There's also the Migrate Drupal module, which is equivalent to the classes, the API portions of Migrate D2D. And this provides the configuration YAML files for specific migrations, like your node migration, as well as plugins. And the source plugin concept here in Drupal 8 is a bit more advanced, or it goes to a higher level than it did in Drupal 7. Drupal 7, your source plugin, was really just your SQL, it's the query and the iterator for the query. And when you construct it, you pass a SQL query in that will be managed by it. In Drupal 8, you would write a source plugin for, say, nodes, which has that query built into it. So it lets you go a level higher, and maybe the Q&A, if people are interested in the technical aspects, we can look a little at a plugin or two. So not everything that was part of the Migrate universe in Drupal 7 is going to be part of Drupal 8 core. Although this is in between. Migrate Upgrade is a module I'm currently working on. Basically, it's faster to go when you don't have to go through the core gatekeepers when you're doing initial development. So this is where the UI for the simple, straight, upgrade all the things functionality is. There's a UI and there's a drush command for doing that. And we're getting close to the point where we will submit that UI into core, and it will be built into core. You just go to example.com/upgrade, fill in your database credentials. We'll try a live demo of that later. And boom. UI drush command. Migrate Plus. That's right now, it's sort of a grab bag of all the other things that are part of Migrate that are not planned to go into core. So this is where the full featured Migrate drush commands, Migrate import, Migrate rollback, and so forth are going to go. This is where the dashboard UI is going to go. This is going to be where source plugins that aren't part of core, like XML, CSV, JSON, etc. Those will go into Migrate Plus, as well as the example, the classic Migrate example module with its beer and wine examples is going into Migrate Plus, at least for now. Maybe we'll move it over to the examples module at a later date. So that's the plan. Where are we? Migrate module, the central API within core. We're still tweaking that API a bit. There are a few things we're trying to get in right. This week I've been working hard on templates, and I'm not going to bore you with the details, but that'll make the Drupal to Drupal migrations much easier. It just went to RTBC today. I'm very hopeful. Migrate Drupal, the Drupal 6 support. We worked on that first because there's so much anxiety in the community about Drupal 6 support going forward. The fact that I don't know how many people here may have followed the whole controversy. Normally, when a given Drupal version is released, the version 2 versions earlier is no longer supported. And because so many people were sort of stuck on Drupal 6 so long, they weren't able to get to Drupal 7, there's a lot of anxiety about losing support when the day Drupal 8 comes out if they still don't have a good way to get to Drupal 8 from Drupal 6. So the solution to that is the Drupal 6 support is going to be extended to some extent, and to help address that anxiety, we also emphasize working on the Drupal 6 migration first. And part of that also was that because Drupal 6 is a little bit farther away from what Drupal 8 looks like than Drupal 7 is, the idea is that once we have the Drupal 6 support done, Drupal 7 is actually relatively, what isn't copy and paste, it's mostly simplification of the Drupal 6 upgrade path. I should talk, I guess, about the timing here. How many are familiar with the plan for semantic versioning with Drupal 8 and the point release concept? Not everyone, I think, is aware of that, but Drupal has always had the policy that there would be no API changes within a major version, no API changes through 6.x or through 7.x, although each major version can potentially break the API. And the thing is that the release cycle for major versions is so drawn out, we go a long, long time without core Drupal being able to take advantage of new technology, without new ideas managing to get into Drupal quickly. So with 8, instead of 1 dot in the version numbers, we're going to have 2 dots. And the last dot will be like the last dot before. That will be bug fixes and tweaks within a minor version instead of within a major version. The middle number in the version, the 0, 1, 2, 8.0, 8.1, 8.2, those are allowed to have enhancements. They aren't going to break backward compatibility of the APIs, but they can add functionality to Drupal so Drupal can grow more quickly and more smoothly until we've finally ready to do some major refactoring for Drupal 9. So one of the things that means is that this upgrade path does not necessarily have to go out in Drupal 8.0, and it's still an open question whether it will. We could release Drupal 8.0 this fall, and it looks like we're on track to do it in the fall. And without the upgrade path, and people who are building new sites can start using it at that point, and if the migration, the upgrade path needs a little more time, that could be added in Drupal 8.1, and then people will be able to start upgrading their old sites. So yeah, as I said, so the Drupal 6 support, right now the core support, the migrations that are in the Migrate Drupal module in core are pretty much done. There are a few bugs here and there that we're still working on. This template business that I'm talking about is going to involve some refactoring of that. I think that's the biggest change that's left at the API level. But we'll see later that you can actually import a D6 site into a D8 site now and have most of it work. Drupal 7, we're just now getting the patches into the core issue queue and getting them to the review stage and the RTBC stage. Those had been being developed in a sandbox off to the side for a while, and that's all being rolled into the core queues now. And as I said, migrate, upgrade, the D6 imports are basically working. It has not been tested with the Drupal 7 path. There's not a monolithic Drupal 7 patch. It's patches for the individual migrations that are part of the Drupal 7, so that makes it a little difficult to pull together a version of Drupal that you could import a Drupal 7 site with. So Migrate Plus, our little grab bag of stuff. What's in that grab bag so far? Basic drush commands. You can do a drush migrate status to see where the migrations you have defined are, what's been imported, what the names of the migrations are so you can run them. And the basic migrate import works. You can specify a specific migration to run. You can run all the migrations. You can run a group of migrations with that. Rollback isn't there yet because the rollback support isn't in core yet. There's a patch for that. Needs a little bit more tweaking and review. The beer example works, basically. You can import your beers like you did in Drupal 7. Main thing I need to get back and do there is add all the comments so the example is useful to anyone who's trying to develop new migrations with Drupal 8. Haven't started the wine example, which is the example that demonstrates more advanced techniques. The advanced techniques are going to look a lot different in Drupal 8. But the beer example looks pretty much like the old one did, or the content that's being migrated and how you migrate it is. The code is much different. And source plugins. A couple of community members are working on a source plugin for CSV files. The patch is in the issue queue, and we've been going back and forth getting that ready to put in. That as soon as I have time to review the latest version of that patch, maybe we'll get that one in there and get to work on the XML source plugin. UI, haven't got to the UI yet. I'm hoping to jumpstart that sometime soon. No guarantees. So of course, you want to know how you can help get this all moving forward and maybe get that upgrade into 8.0 rather than 8.1. First thing is to test. We've got a basically functional D6 path, so if you have a D6 site, set up an empty D8 site, try importing it. Report back. Anything that doesn't quite map the way you expect it to, anything that doesn't work, report it. You just need core Drupal 8 plus migrate upgrade module. And in terms of reporting, it may be difficult to tell if something goes wrong, whether it's migrate upgrade's fault or core's fault. But I would say report first in the migrate upgrade issue queue, and if I look at it and decide it's core's fault, then I'll move it over to the core queue. Review. There are a lot of core patches out there that need people to review them. There's a lot of things that needs review, and those of us who've been working hard on these core patches are so busy generating core patches, we're not necessarily keeping up and reviewing each other's patches. So any help you can give, especially now the Drupal 7, we're trying to get that going. We're trying to get enough of those migrations reviewed and into core that starts becoming a viable path. And for the more technical people, the developers, contribute. There's a lot of code yet to be written here, especially on the contrib side. I could use some help with Migrate Plus. There's a bit of a chicken and the egg because it's difficult to develop migrations without the tools that are in Migrate Plus. So if we can get those tools more advanced, that makes it easier for more people to contribute to work on migrations for Drupal 8. And of course, groups.drupal.org/imp, the discussions around migration, there hasn't been much activity on the group itself, but there is a weekly hangout. Wednesday nights, usually 8 o'clock Central. So you can go to the group and get the address of the hangout and come and listen to what people are discussing, throw in your 2 cents. Several resources. Once I get my presentation up to the up to the session page on the website, you'll be able to click those. Oh, I will point out in particular that we have an IRC channel specifically for discussing Migrate, in particular the Drupal 8 effort. So if you get our IRC, Drupal Migrate, you'll find me there, you'll find Chicks there, and Benji, and Fina Proxima. Yeah, bring your questions, bring your suggestions. So Q&A, before we start the Q&A, let's do a little live demo and get that started. So, oh no, not Chrome. That's in Firefox at the moment. All right, this is my blog site. I know it's sad, especially the date on that post. It's like the contractor with the leaky roof and the paint peeling off the side of the house. You just don't have time to keep your own house in order. This is a blank, empty Drupal 8 site. Let's fill it in. So you provide the address of your old site. You do that so it can find your public files and copy them across. That's the simplest way to do that. It's not necessarily the most efficient way because it's scraping the files over the web. Alternatively, you can copy your files to somewhere local to the D8 server and provide the file path to your files there. And provide the credentials for your source DB. And if you had, that's not implemented yet, but obviously you can't just scrape your private files. So we are going to need to provide a private file migration, and that is definitely, you would need to copy them someplace local and provide the directory here. So let's start that off. Live demo. Okay, so that's going to take a little while. I will point out one thing. Users are really, really slow at the moment, semi-intentionally, because of the new password hashing algorithm in Drupal 8, and we're going to look at a way to reduce the cycles on that during migration, so that users will migrate in a reasonable time. And since this is right now, it's hung up on the users. Any questions?
Has there ever been any thought given to moving like views into migrations?
Views are part of the core migration path, because views is part of Drupal 8 core.
Yeah, exactly.
So anything that's in Drupal 8 core is going to be handled by the core migration, even if it was originally a contrib module.
Okay.
So, like, obviously CCK for Drupal 6 is being migrated into fields for Drupal 8.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Would it be useful in terms of testing for the Drupal 7 components to put together a makefile with all the patches so that somebody could easily throw up a site, test?
Yeah, I haven't been involved in the Drupal 7, so I'm not sure if all the patches that are there are enough to do that, but that is worth making note of. And I'll pass it on to Fina Proxima has been mainly involved in that. So let me just make a note. Oops. Yep, still doing users. Oop, not there. Where am I? Good old Evernote.
If it's not too invasive, how many users is it doing?
Well, got a lot of spam users on this. 1,000 or so.
Okay.
In Drupal 7, that would take 30 seconds, but it's quite a bit slower here.
With Drupal 8, does it work the same way where it keeps it, like, hashes the password in the database in some sort of special token so that the next time they log in, it checks it with the old algorithm and all that? Is that how it works?
I don't know. I have not.
I was just in that whole, I was just swimming in that issue recently. So.
Yeah, I have not dug into that. I've actually been spending more of my time on the base Migrate API and the tools, so I'm a little less familiar with the details of the upgrade path. There's a lot there. There's a lot to learn with Drupal 8. I'm finally feeling like I have a good grasp of configuration entities, finally, which is important because migrations are configuration entities. Ooh, here, we're almost done. And boom. There it is. Even that picture, which was on my D6 site, came over, embedded in the node, and I always have to check this. Just demonstrate that I'm not just pointing to it on the old site. But you see that's the local Drupal 8 URL on that picture. So one thing that's used to work with this and isn't working at the moment, chasing head is so much fun, is that you don't see, let me find here, comments. So there were comments on that. The comments are not don't see the comments here. But the comments actually were migrated. They appear to be attached to the right. They're not displaying. So I'm thinking something recently changed involving the comment configuration. That somehow the comment field is not on the node, is not being displayed. It's back there somewhere. It's hidden. So that's one of the little bugs that we still need to work out. But there's the user, the author of the node, that relationship is still there, the data's there, the content looks good. So I feel good about that. Now there's a, can do it through Drush as well. And just rebuild first.
I had another question, if you have time.
Sure.
So what if you're using like a module in your Drupal 6 site that adds like a field type, and then Drupal 8 core doesn't have that field type. How would that be handled?
Well, that module then should have a Drupal 8 version
Okay.
implementing that content type, and it will need to implement the
So you-
migration configuration and plugins necessary to migrate
Okay,
that.
gotcha. So you
And-
can't just do the simple migration then in that instance, where you just give the URL or? Like
What do you mean?
you walk through that form where you did your simple migration, where you gave
Right.
the URL and the database information.
Right, so that contrib module in its Drupal 8, it's providing the migration of that data.
Okay.
And it tags that with a Drupal version.
Okay.
And so the tool there is pulling all the migrations with that tag and running all of them. So
Okay.
it will automatically run the contrib module.
Oh, wow. So as long as you have that module installed on your D8 site
Yeah.
and enabled, you'll be fine?
Yep.
Oh, wow, that's pretty slick.
Yep.
Cool.
Okay, so Drush can do it in Drush too. Yeah, this I just implemented like a week ago. Ooh, don't copy those credentials. So, and again, that'll take a few minutes, especially when it hits the users. And I've never seen a migration of any size where there weren't missing files. Always, somehow, websites lose files. Don't know where they go. The same place the socks from the dryer go.
Exactly.
So, any more questions? Anyone curious about what migration code looks like?
Yeah, let's look at it.
Look at the beer example. That's fairly simple. Oh, my poor little MacBook is straining because it's trying to encrypt all those passwords. Oh, there's one of the migrations built into Core for image toolkits, but let's check the beer ones, they're simpler. A migrate example. So, we'll ignore that. I split out all the stuff that sets up your beer content types and so forth into a separate module so you can see exactly how small a migration module can be. So your old info files from Drupal 7, now they're info YAML files in Drupal 8. And basically all we need to set up here is our dependencies. You'll notice there's no module file. If you're not implementing any hooks or anything like that, you don't need to actually have a module file anymore in Drupal 8. So the configuration, we create a migration group for our beer. There's just give it an ID, a label, and we tell it what database connection key we're using. Unlike most real-world migrations, we've loaded our source data into our default database for Drupal 8. But you'll see that there's a shared configuration. In Drupal 7, you could, when you defined your migrations in hook migrate API, you'd pass arguments. If you passed arguments to your group, they would be shared among all the migrations. Now that's done in the YAML file. So every migration that's part of this group will pick up this configuration, namely that in the source key, in the source, the key value will be set to default. So, and the beer term migration. So everything's got an ID, it's a machine name for your migration. This is the name you'll use in your Drush. Oh, you know what? We can actually run the beer example too. Anyway, so ID, that's the machine name. Or maybe not. Hoi. Live demo. Something's broken out from under me here. Specified key was too long.
Whoa.
This, of course, this worked a few days ago. Leading edge. So we're not going to see it run. But label, your description of your migration. There's your relationship to your group. This is the group we belong to, the beer group, which we just saw. So the source. The same way that old migrations, in your constructor, you'd set up your source, your map, your destination, and your field mappings. In Drupal 8, you don't need to specify the map. That's done more implicitly than it used to be. But here's your source. You're saying your source, we've got a plugin named beer term. And what we're saying is there's I'm not going to try to describe the Drupal 8 plugin system. That's worth a 2-hour session on its own. But basically that corresponds to a class. And we can look at the class over here. And the class provides the query. Lists the fields, and this is how your map gets set up. This is where you specify what the ID is going to be in your map. So there's nothing very complex in the code here. You query your list of fields just to document them, and your IDs. The rest of it comes from the YAML file. So the source, we're saying, uses that plugin. Destination, this is a core plugin. It uses the entity plugin with the taxonomy term bundle. And Drupal 8, another step forward with Drupal 8 is Drupal 7, of course, has entities, but the core support, API support for entities was a little bit incomplete. There was still too much. Each of the entities had its own node save, user save that all acted a little different. The entity API in contrib in D7 helped to deal with that, but in Drupal 8 it's much more consistent internally, and there is no separate node save, user save, so on. And there's the destination plugins do have little special stuff, but it's not nearly. The different entities aren't special snowflakes to the extent they were in Drupal 7. It's a lot more consistent. So mappings. This is a new concept. This is a different way of dealing with the mapping process, and that is we have the processing pipeline. And what that is for each destination field, you map it and you can define a sequence of transformations. This isn't a great example because it's all of these are single steps, but we'll start off the beer term. Of course, it's a taxonomy term, which we identify by the vocabulary ID, and we're saying we're hard coding it. This is like the default value that used to go on your field mapping in Drupal 7. Now it's a default value plugin, process plugin, and we set the default value to that string, which is the name of our vocabulary. The name of the term is coming from the style value in the database. Description comes from the details in the database. We see we're pulling those here in the query and documenting those fields here. And then we used to have the source migration on your field mapping in your old Drupal 7 constructors. Now we use the migration plugin, tell it what migration to be looking up against. That used to be the argument to source migration Drupal 7. And we're indicating what source field we are going to put through that. So let me see if I can, one of these has a sequence of processing steps. And they all look like single steps in this case. But I hope you can look at this and find this simpler to deal with than writing code in a constructor to set all this up. All right, so any more questions? What is it? 348.
Yeah, I have a question. In D7, you with the class you create for your migration, you had a method you could override called process row, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
So now, can you still do that? Would that be in the bear comments class for this example you have up?
Yes.
Okay.
It would, and it is even. Well, maybe, I'm not sure we used it. Where is the, there it is, beer node. And this may look rather similar. Here we are pulling in the related terms for the node. So we're doing a query against the equivalent of a term node table for the beer we are importing and just fetching it directly into the row here. And you can set it directly. Technically, the cleaner object-oriented way to do it is through the method, do with the set source property.
Okay.
So that there's no more, you may remember there was a separator you could add to the field mapping. We don't actually have that plugin anymore, or do we? Maybe I'm just... We can look if we have the technology. All of this is many layers deep. Right, separator did not make it, but it's such a simple thing for you to do in your prepare row or through some sort of callback. We do still have the callback concept.
Okay.
And so there are the various things you can process. So what I was trying to get at, and didn't have a good example, is that for each of these you could have multiple, if you wanted to give a default value in addition to the normal processing for some reason. In YAML you can make an array like that. And we can do so that would say first run through the migration plugin, and then if the output of that is null, go to the next step, which is the default value.
Okay.
And you can chain the processing plugins in that way, the same way you could chain the methods on the old field mappings, except that with the old method, you couldn't control the order they were executed. That order was hard-coded, But now, through this pipeline, you can do them in any order you want.
For default value, is there any way you can pass in like a method of the class or like a function that it could run instead of just like hard coding 23?
You can use the callbacks to I don't know the syntax. Remember the syntax off the top of my head. It's probably something like
Okay, cool.
all right. Okay, I think we're ready to wrap the day up then.